This is our wrap-up of the deep dive into podcasting. We've kind of done a 5-part series, and Erik Fisher is here to just, lay it to rest, so
put it to bed.
Put it to bed, but because he's a podcasting pro that I've known for a long time, and also another podcasting and live streaming pro, Chris Stone, is here, who is going to try to keep us together because we'll go off track, and Chris is the one who can do all that for us. So we want to make this show all about you, so make sure you ask your questions down below. If you know somebody who's maybe struggling with their podcast or even maybe starting one for the first time, this is a show for them. So just mention them down below wherever you're watching this from or where you're listening from. Share this with them. Call them into the conversation. Even if they can't watch it live, we're more than happy to answer questions after the fact. So make sure you guys do that. I appreciate you guys watching today. Chris Stone, how are you doing today, my friend?
I am living the dream. I'm on the best show on the interweb, Social Media News Live. Well, you know what, Jeff? I'd be watching anyway, so why not show up and try to interrupt you two knuckleheads?
And look at this, what he did. He actually put the whole logo. Now that's a professional, ladies and gentlemen. Look how awesome that is. For you guys listening, he's got my logo up on his TV. He's got a fancy, smancy studio, so very, very cool. We've got TV. Some friends in the audience. Our friend Gary Stockton, who always watches over on YouTube, saying, "Good morning, you good people." Usually we're lovely, but Chris came today, so we're not that. Thanks, Gary, for stopping in. And we've got our friend over at LinkedIn, Martin Buckland, saying, "Good morning from Toronto." Is it hot in Toronto? Because it's hot in Texas. I don't know if it gets hot up there in Toronto, but gosh darn it, it's hot here. And then we have the other person from Dealcasters, Jim Fuse from Fusion Marketing, saying, "Hello, beautiful people of planet Earth." Yes, planet Earth.
What planet is he on right now?
I don't know, but that narrows it down.
That is an excellent first question.
Yes. All right, so we're gonna get going on this because there's so many cool stuff about networking and podcasting. So I'm gonna hit go on the podcast machine. Are you ready with your line there, Chris? Because I made sure you had it ready. So okay.
Yes,
Here
I am.
We go. Hello, folks. Well, I'll start that again because I was laughing. Hello, folks. Welcome to Social Media News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not.
And I'm Chris Stone, and this is the show that keeps you up to date on what's happening in the world of social media and more.
Have you ever wondered if you can have genuine networking in the podcasting world? Maybe you've been curious about techniques that lead to maybe impactful connections beyond the microphone, or maybe you're just wondering if networking can help grow your podcast or live show. If these thoughts have crossed your mind, then today's episode is tailor-made for you. We are delighted to host a guest who embodies ideas of networking in podcasting. Erik Fisher, the man behind Beyond the To-Do List, will be unveiling his podcasting journey, his networking strategies, and his invaluable advice for creating lasting relationships with a podcast. So sit back, clear your schedule, clear your mind, and get ready for this week's episode of Social Media News Live. Erik, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Man, that was a build-up. Jeez.
Oh, yeah.
I've got to live up to it now.
You better. If I could talk, I mean, golly, I have like rocks in my mouth or something. But if you don't know Erik, he's been on the show before. He's co-hosted on the show before. He is amazing. You really need to know him. You need to follow him everywhere. He is the producer and host of the long-running Beyond the To-Do List podcast. For almost 10 years, he's talked with experts. Over 10 years.
Over 11, actually. It's 11 now.
11 years. He's talked with experts on how to implement productivity strategies in their personal and professional lives. If you listen to one podcast about productivity, it needs to be this one. He has got some fabulous, fabulous guests and asked some great questions. He's also currently the account manager at Now Marketing Group. And Erik, I just appreciate you coming back on the show because I know you're busy over there at Now, but I appreciate you coming on. And Chris Stone, my co-host, who does so much stuff. He's been in the music industry. He does podcasting. He does live remote producing. He does the Dealcasters. He's taught me all I know about Amazon Live. Chris Stone, thank you for coming today, my friend.
Thanks for having me on the best show on the interwebs. I'd be here anyway, watching and listening, Jeff, and you know that, and I just love being a part of this community. And Erik, is this like your 58th time on this show? I mean,
he's been on a lot.
Haven't counted.
You know, really, you haven't been on since like a year. Like, I don't think you've been on for a year or so as a guest.
I don't know. I think there's been at least once or twice in the past year.
Well, you did the productivity for podcasting episode and getting ready for 2023. So that's why I'm saying, so that was probably the last one. So anyway, I'm talking about podcasting, and we talked about, Chris doing live streaming. I do live streaming, as you can see right now. But I wouldn't be able to do that without our sponsors. Wrong button there. Holy cow. I'm doing everything wrong. Socialmedianewslive.com. That was Leslie Samuels screaming whistle at you. So I'm sure he appreciates that. But you can find out more about Ecamm at socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. They're what allow me to do amazing things like accidentally press the wrong button and bring on a video. You can bring on a video during your podcast if you would like, but you can do all sorts of cool things. And actually, when we're done with this, I have isolated tracks of all of the audio from all of my guests. I have isolated video tracks, so I'll be able to cut that mistake that I just made live on the air very, very easily because of Ecamm. So if you want to find out more about them, make sure you go to socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. Let me hit the right button now. There we go. All right, on with the show. All right, we're talking about networking and podcasting, and I think this is something that we don't really talk about because you don't think of like a podcast to be a networking thing. But if you start, because a lot of people don't talk about it or drill down and say, hey, this is a strategy you need to use. But it really is. We've got some friends who are in a mastermind, and one of his strategies is he's interviewing people to help him get a job because he's interviewing CEOs who need his services. We network when we're getting guests on our show. Networking happens when Chris and I do kind of the same thing. We repurpose clips. That allows us to network with other people that we want to have on our show, with people we've had on our show. So I think it's something we really need to talk about, Erik. And you're really good at this because I've listened to your show for a long time. You've got amazing guests like Michael Hyatt, John Acuff, Todd Henry, and not only have you've had them on once, but you've had them as repeat guests. And they wouldn't come on your show if it wasn't good and they didn't find value from being on that. So I just want to kind of start the whole thing, like, how has networking, played a role in the success and the evolution of Beyond the To-Do List?
Well, it's plain to me that networking is the only reason I have a show. I wouldn't have any success even starting the show, with the landscape being different now than it was back then, because it was because I had enough community involvement with other podcasters and podcast fans and connections in that, with different podcasts, and as well as co-hosting one at the time that gave me a lot of connections and awareness that allowed me to start the show at all. But not only that, but then to grow it as initially and as quickly as I was able to. And so just knowing that I had those people to rely on, I'm not talking like, onesie twosie Facebook messaging all my friends and family, which back then I did some of, admittedly,
right.
Because it's like, hey, I got a podcast, you're super excited. And, things have changed a little bit. You don't technically do that. Although I'm in some Facebook groups where some people had said, hey, that's all I did. But point being, if you don't have any kind of network or connection to begin with, that's something you start right away, regardless of what kind of creator you are, because that's where your connections come from. That's where your audience starts to come from.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about, because I think people will find it interesting, is how we met, how we got started. If you guys don't know, we've talked about it before, but Erik and I are part of a mastermind group that we've met for over 5 years. Every Monday it's like almost like getting close to 7, I think. Anyway, but we met back at Podcast San Diego, which was kind of this add-on thing that was at Social Media Marketing World. Was it in 2012, 2011, somewhere around there?
Yeah, it was I think it was 13. Well, I think it was 14 or 15.
Yeah.
One of those two.
Because I wasn't speaking at Social Media Marketing World at that point. And I had.
Yeah, I think it was 15, because I think it was the second year that I was at the event. And I think it was, and I met you at the event. But then the next day, we found out we were both going to this, essentially a all-day meetup with some sessions and some community and some networking that Podcast Movement was putting on. And so we were both there and happened to see you again. And I can't remember if we were sitting down at the table eating lunch together or not, but I just remember we started chatting more. I know we met the day before that, though, in the hallways at the Manchester. Yeah. And because you can't not remember that you met a guy with that beard.
I didn't have a beard. I was just starting. Remember? It wasn't really there.
Still,
it was a little baby beard.
It may not be where it is now, but it was way more than I have right now. And so it was definitely standing out. I got to call that out.
So back to that, because we went, and I had not started a podcast. That's why I had gone to podcast, San Diego's, because I wanted to learn, and I had an idea to take Manly Pinterest Tips to be a podcast, and that's when we met. So take us back a little bit to that. I mean, you told us you just saw me with my scruffy face, but like, why did you go to Podcast San Diego? You were pretty established as a podcaster already. So why did you go to that, and maybe some takeaways that you had from it?
Well, the thing is that you can't not attend events. You can't ever, I mean, ultimately the thing about networking is you can't ever not. It's like working out. Once you get it to a certain point, you can't just say, okay, I've reached my peak and now I'm done. You have to continue to interact with people. The thing about networking is it's not about the network itself, and it's not about what you get out of it or what you give to it. It's about the relationships, and that's an ongoing thing. I mean, try to tell your wife that, like, hey, we've been married for like 10 years now. I think I'm going to stop like trying, whatever that means. Right. And so, again, I liked that it was a small, local, face-to-face gathering about a singular topic. And honestly, I think we need more of those again. I think we've got all the large podcasts. I mean, we've got a number of large podcast conferences out there. There could probably be room for one or two more. But I think there's way more room for the thing that's kind of like a pod camp. And if you're unfamiliar with that, that's something that Christopher S. Penn and Chris Brogan created. They happened to call it Pod Camp, but it was really all kinds of content marketing and creation and all that before the creator economy was called that back in the day. But that was something where in most of the major cities, you'd go to Boston or Chicago or Nashville was one of my favorites. We even did one, I think, in Indianapolis once. But there's wherever you were local within an hour or two drive, you could find a pod camp that was an annual thing, and it was an all day 1 or 2 day thing, and it was sessions, and anybody could speak. You didn't have to like pay or submit. You did submit, but then you got on the list, and there was this thing called the law of 2 feet, that if you were sitting in the session and it didn't apply to you within a couple minutes, you could get up and walk out, no hard feelings. The magic was always in the hallway, and it was that kind of a thing. And so that is, I think, something that needs to be brought back and coordinated, I think, a little more. Somebody else, I'm making the call. Somebody needs to do it. I wish I had time to do it. I think maybe a conglomerate of or group of people could do it, but let's do this.
Yeah. Well, I want to just real quick, one of the things you said about always be learning, and our friend Dan Miller, who is a longtime podcaster, one of the things that always impressed me, and I still see him at Podcast Movement or other conferences where he's attending, he attends sessions and takes notes. He has made it. Like, he is one of the big wigs, I think, but I don't know how old he is. He is older than me, but he continuously learns, and he doesn't come and speak and then bail. He sits there and he goes around and he talks with people and he goes to those sessions and is always learning, which I just think is amazing. So,
well, the thing about that is that, and I've talked to him about this, is like, he said that basically Dan Miller said that he doesn't look at it. He doesn't look at his situation as having, air quotes, made it. Mm-hmm. He looks at it as he has a peer group. He has an audience. He has followers. He has fans. He has friends. He has people that need his help, and he's going to always continue to do that. And the thing is just the landscape and the current state of things changes all the time. There's always new things. I don't want to put it in a FOMO kind of a framing, but there's always something new coming along to talk about, to try, to experiment with. And if you're not putting your hand on the pulse, either by showing up in person or even doing something digitally, or having trusted curated sources of news, et cetera, and or people with good opinions like Dan and this show, that you're going to miss out on something that could invariably move the needle for you much more than what you're already currently doing. I mean, if I've learned anything about productivity, is that things continue to move and there's ways to optimize things, but only with awareness and data. And that's what doing that and showing up and being present and interacting with people does for you.
That's great. So speaking of being present, Chris Stone, I don't remember where the first time we met was. I think it was at a conference in real life. I mean, we had talked back and forth online and stuff, but I think it was maybe at Podcast Movement, or maybe it was the Amazon thing where we first met in real life for the first time. But I would love to know.
We met was networking on a podcast on Dealcasters. Jim Fuse says, "Hey, there's this. Do you know who Jeff C is?" I was like, "I know who he is, but I've never met him yet." And so Erik, I mean, this isn't. I always in my business when I'm dealing with someone and I'm having a client call with a prospective podcaster, I always tell them the most underrated, and I mean that in the best possible way, because people hear underrated, they think it's a bad thing. But people forget about this being one of the most underrated, in fact, in some cases, the most important part of doing a podcast. This is your opportunity to meet more people. And this is your opportunity to get more contacts. People want to talk about LinkedIn Navigator. They want to talk about all these, ways to get leads and to get all these contacts. You want to do business with somebody, ask them to be on your podcast. And then be able to interact with that person and network with that person. But I think a lot of people when they get into this business, Erik, and they want to do a podcast, they just want to do a podcast because they think they should. And when you have a conversation with them about networking and actually increasing their business leads and increasing what they can do from a business perspective, you start having that conversation with them, but they're just starting, right? So maybe, is there something in your experience, Erik, because you've been doing this ever since the microphone was invented, is in your experience, is there what was the moment, or maybe a story of when networking actually said, and you were like, oh my gosh, this is for me. This is actually something that I can take and develop and use in my podcasting as a part of your journey?
Well, I think the best story I can tell you, I mean, again, I would say that there's no amount of my show existing or having any success without networking predating that. So I knew of somebody who was pretty close with Michael Hyatt, and I knew that I had to have Michael Hyatt on my show. I didn't know how or when, but I knew it had to happen. And so I was at, I knew Michael was going to be speaking at, what was it called at the time? Blog World in New York City in the summer of 2012. And so my friend was going to be there too. And I said, hey, can you introduce me? We had never met before. Little did I know, Michael already knew of me because I was, doing little co-hosting things with other people. And so he had heard my voice, he had been impressed, and I didn't know it. So then when I went up to meet him, and his book platform was new at the time, and I said, hey, and he's like, he knew my name before I knew, before I had introduced myself. Nice. He recognized my voice, etc. At least that's how I like to remember it. That may not be totally true, but because what I will say is that another person, John Acuff, did the same thing to me. I saw him speaking at a Dave Ramsey thing in Indianapolis in like 2011, 2012 or something, that same summer. And I walked up, I was in line, got up to meet him, and I went to shake his hand. He's like, Erik Fisher. And I'm like, he knew my name already because I'd been interacting with him online and had caught his attention, et cetera. So but the importance there was I knew that I was going to have to suck it up, be brave, and ask for these bigger name people to be on my show, which did not exist yet. Right? Like, you're asking somebody to be on my show, and what do most podcasters these days, if it's a big name guest, you expect to hear back from the guest. Well, what's your downloads? How long have you been, how many shows do you have? And things like, all this data and metrics. And it's like, they didn't ask me any of that. They knew that what I was going to make was going to be really good. I think I had the name at the time already, and they were like, ooh. I mean, I'm faking that they were excited, but ultimately, it's because they had contact with me / contact with me through something else, whether it was their forum they'd created or through somebody else that they knew I knew. And so I was kind of vetted already. And so it was that approach to them that, being bold without being cocky about it, right? That I was able to make that ask. And so here's the key. Michael was actually the first person I ever recorded with. I had other people lined up, but it was like, they weren't going to be able to do it in time for me to launch when I wanted to. So I was like, okay. So I recorded with him first, and he was my first solo podcast recording. And even now I go back and, show's much better than it was then 11 years ago, but that episode's still really good and I'm proud of it.
So Jim Fuse says, Erik has a great voice. Love to be on the to-do list. Maybe you should just start doing ASMR and just for Jim Fuse, just talk into the mic and rub your beard on it or something.
Jim, what planet are you on right now, Jim?
So Chris always talks about that podcasting live video is a long game, right? In fact, I've talked about it before, but I am the producer for Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. Well, I've had a relationship with Guy, had him on my show. He's like my first big guest. And people need to understand that there's a long-term effect with some of these guests that you never know what's going to happen. Another example, Erik and I met at Podcast San Diego. We became friends. We started to do this mastermind thing. He got me the gig running Pinterest for Social Media Examiner. Then Social Media Examiner hired me. They were my biggest client for 5 years. I did their shows. I remote produced, all because, and it trickles back to networking at Podcast San Diego. And so those things, more and more people as I talk to with them and interview them, that kind of stuff happens. And we've got to understand it's a long game. You don't go in it going like, hey, Erik, I'm glad to meet you. What can you do for me? So many people have that like used car salesman mentality is what I call it. You know what I'm talking about. And it's not that. You give and then it just comes back. So
well, I think it's important too, Jeff, and just really quickly, just talking about this and dovetailing on this, it's like we're talking about all the great things about this and what you should be doing in network. Don't forget too, and people will remember, like Erik had a great story there, and that will always be remembered by both parties, right? What also will be remembered is if you weren't considerate about someone's time, if you didn't deliver value on their show, like all of those things that you just have to, you got to make sure you're prepared, because those impressions, just like any sort of networking situation, those impressions mean something. So make sure that you've prepped yourself from, before, delivering whatever you're going to deliver on value, and show up and do it too. It's not, don't just play podcaster, right? This is, this is a real thing that you should take seriously.
Yeah. We got some great comments. Jeffrey Fitzgerald says, always a great show. Love Erik's quote. They don't look at the metrics. They knew it would be good. A good word. Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey, for that. I think, not seeing what you can take from people, going in there. And Chris, you've done a great example of this. You've helped kind of figure out my strategy is like when he repurposes a ton of stuff from the Dealcasters and his shows for his clients, and I do the same thing for this show, and I'm always wanting to highlight the guests. Like, I'll repurpose this, I'll get great clips from Erik, I'll put it out there, I'll tag him, and what that does, not only does it make Erik look good and help me look like a thought leader, which I need all that help I can get, but what it does, it gets me guests who, like, if I'm on Jeff's show, I know I'm going to be repurposed. Like, I know it's going to go out there many times, and he's going to make me look great. I don't think podcasters understand how important that is that when you make your guests look great, it really gets you better and better and better guests as you continue to go down the road. So anyway, on that note, Erik, what are maybe some misconception podcasters might have about networking? You mentioned, not doing the ask, the worst they can say is no, but what are some other things that podcasters might miss when they're first starting out and they're wanting to grow their podcast with networking?
Well, in podcasting, I think one of the misconceptions when it comes to networking is just common across every industry, which is that networking is about making connections so that whether you can get something now or get something later, you're getting something. And instead of that, looking at it like you're interacting and creating relationship with people and you're giving to them, you're giving of your time, you're giving of your platform, you're allowing that. And not only that, but I think it's more of a, podcasters specifically, I guess, maybe there's, and maybe even live video, but there's this idea of it's like strip mining almost. It's like, okay, let's get all that we can get out of this valley and then we'll move on to the next one and so on and so on. But again, like you said, Jeff, I've had, a number of different people who've been on the show multiple times over the course of like 11 years, and they wouldn't come back unless I was treating them well and they were finding value and they were, having great conversations. And so I think the key is not just with guests, but with your audience is always providing value without expecting anything back per se. That's not to say you don't want to have people listen or give feedback or, all those kinds of good things, but you want to continually be growing and you want to continually be growing those relationships. I think every time, like, for example, I've had Todd Henry on a number of times. And so then what was cool was suddenly I'm in Indianapolis, I think September 2016, 17 to see U2 with my friend Todd. And suddenly we're walking out of, we're about ready to finish out of Chipotle, one of our favorite places to eat. And Todd Henry and his son walk in. They're there for the same show. And so we were able to hang out with him like in person.
Right.
He knew me instantly. Like there was a rapport. And he said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, we just met Bono." And I'm like, "What?" So anyway, and I never forgave him for that.
Yeah.
No. So again, that was all gravy. That was all bonus, but it was built up over years that like instantly, like he recognized me and I knew who he was. And then we walked back over to the Lucas Oil Stadium and waited in line together. And it was fun.
Yeah. That's those kind of things are what make you love podcasting or live video or interviewing people even more, because it's, the world opens up when you're able to interview people across the world or a country or, whatever. It's just so cool. I can nerd out about this stuff for a long time. So I want to move on to this next section where we're talking about some strategies for this. And our friend Gary Stockton, one of the things he said, podcasts have a funny way of facilitating introductions. You never know who's listening. Yeah, there's something about being in somebody's ear that just is really, really cool. And there is that intimacy that happens, Gary. You're right. But Gary has a great question. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this, Erik and Chris. What are your thoughts on podcast directories or places where you pay to get access to guests? And I know, Erik, you have done kind of a pod matching kind of a thing before. I don't know if Chris has or not. I have not personally done one. But first of all, let's talk podcast directories, and then let's talk about the access to guests. So go ahead, Erik.
Yeah. So let's see. So thoughts on podcast directories directories are great. Like go look through them, find people. I know that I hope I pronounce his name right. Alex Sanfilippo or Filippo.
Sanfilippo.
Filippo.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sanfilippo. Alex Sanfilippo has created a number of different things, but one of the first things, or best things even, that he's created is this thing called Podmatch. And essentially it's like speed dating for guests and hosts to find common interests or, you can advertise that, hey, I'm a podcaster, I should say. I'm not a podcast. I'm a podcaster. I am a podcaster who's looking for guests, and I'm looking for this type of guest, people who have expertise in these, say, key metrics, SEO, etc. And then other people can go in and say, I am a guest, or I'm looking to guest. I may be also a podcaster, but I'm looking to guest. And so it kind of matches you up, and you can consider / accept whatever. And it's a great way to start up conversations and or make those initial connections. You may not find, tons of them that work out great, but I don't, you may know this, Chris, if it's paid or not. I don't believe it's paid. I think it's just there for the benefit of everyone, because we all grow when we connect.
Do you mean Podmatch?
Yeah, Podmatch.
It is. It's a paid service, and so it's just going to turn into maybe you should talk to Podmatch, Jeff, and
we'll have them on. Yeah.
It's going to turn into a commercial. They have guests and they host, but I am a part of Podmatch as an agency. So I have I have my clients that I go and I use Podmatch to get guests for the shows that I remote produce as well. Can't say enough great things about it, to be honest. And so I think the right answer, though, is both. You should use these things to kind of quantitatively fill what you need to stay consistent if you have a guest, and make sure you're really doing the due diligence and looking. It's a dating service, just like Erik said. So there's going to be some bad dates. I mean, it's just going to happen. This is the law of, whatever the law is. And right. So, you're going to have some clunkers, but it is, Alex does a fantastic job here again as a commercial for Podmatch. Here's my affiliate code. You can, they do a great job of going in and just weeding out the people that are bad actors, or the people that are just, not doing, just showing up and just paying the money and not doing anything. It's like, hey, this is not for you. Right? We have serious people on this platform. We have people that really are putting in the work. And I've gotten clients out of it as a remote producer, because they'll be on a show and I'll pull them on as a host. And it's just sort of like, hey, can you do this for me? And I'm like, yes, I can. And so again, this is another part of networking, except I was, a producer for a particular show. your network expands out, right? It's more of a quantitative thing, but the right thing to do is to really have a quality personal network and use these other services to help build it. And, it helps you as a podcaster become more consistent with your shows.
So Erik, what is because Chris is taking it from an agency kind of thing. You have done it. I don't think this particular service, but you've used one similar. What has been your results for it? Would you do it again? Because I know you have to pay money to get in this network, and then they match you with people. You get them on your show. Was that valuable for you? Would you recommend somebody doing something like that?
Yes, and I'll name it. It was Interview Connections, and it was well worth it, I think. And what was done, and what was great was that they did kind of this discovery stuff with you right up front, where they walk you through like, okay, and the purpose of it is for you as whoever you are. I mean, again, I don't have to be a podcaster. I could just be a person with a new book or a person who wants to gain more authority and awareness. You go to them and they find you placement on other podcasts. And so I just happen to be a podcaster looking for other podcast listeners to listen to mine, but hey, whatever. But they went through, here's all the different topics Erik can talk about. Here's, and then they pitch you, and you have a certain amount that they fill. And if the person likes you and says, yes, let's have a discovery call, you do that. Or if they don't, and they just want to book you, you say yes. And if it's a fit, again, you can also deny and say, oh no, I don't think this is a fit. But I got to admit that, like, not only by doing those did I see an uptick in other outside of them people asking me to be on shows again, which was something I hadn't done for a long time and kind of gotten out of it in terms of my regular rhythm of seeking out or being asked, etc. It was well valuable. So I just think that the more you're appearing, the more you're seeking out appearances. Again, key here is I'm always of the mind to go out of way and ask people to be on mine. And I get a lot of email pitches about, again, I get so many. At some point here, I need to do a real case study and just say, here's how many I got in a week. And here's how many were.
You could tell they didn't even listen to your show.
Yeah. I mean, right. And that's the thing is like, hey, I love your show on productivity and this person talking about this topic. Here's my guest who's, I think should be on your show. Way other topic. It's like Bitcoin. And I'm like,
builds Hello Kitty purses. Yes.
Yeah. That holds Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, what?
Yeah. So on this note, because I have not used this, and what I have done, I usually, it's my friends or my people in my circle, or from when I worked at Social Media Examiner, the people I was in contact with. That way I was able to invite on the show. But I also think something that we don't talk about is we have this loose, like, podcasting network, like, especially with the Dealcasters and even with Erik, he and I will email each other back and forth and go, hey, this guy was great, or I read this book about productivity. You need to have this guy on your show. But Chris, a lot of times, he'll say, you need to have Dave Jackson on your show. I'm like, so, and Erik said the same thing. I'm like, okay, I need to get Dave Jackson. And so kind of use your own internal network to find, because we have this kind of loose base thing where, Chris will say, hey, can you give me an introduction to this person? And I'll say, hey, I saw him on your show. Do you think he would be a fit on mine? That is one of the best ways to do it, because having that email introduction or that messenger introduction is just the coolest way to do it. So anyway, I wanted to say that. Well,
and I think a lot of it is because in Erik, you probably see this a lot. There are just people that's their marketing is getting on as many podcasts as a guest as possible. And what happens is they're on 450 podcasts in a year, and they say the same thing on 438 of them. And so, like, are they serving your audience? And so you just have to understand, like, you are as a podcast host, your job is to serve your audience, and having an interesting guest is cool, but is that interesting guest really going to serve your audience? And if the answer is no, just because they have a name, then maybe you don't have them on your show. And I think there's a ton of people, again, the bad actors in Podmatch are kind of weeded out, but for the most part, there's a ton of people that are like putting in the reps. I gotta get in as many podcasts as I possibly can. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But if they're saying the same thing every time, do you really need to have them on their show? And if you've got a really robust network like you're talking about, then you can kind of mix and match and really help serve your audience.
Yeah. And we have, real quick,
I've got a response to that. So
okay, go ahead. Do your response.
My secret sauce, as I've shared a couple different times, so it's not so secret anymore, is it's fine if I listen to guest X on 5 different shows and I know their talking points inside and out. That's great. But what that means is I've heard the host ask those questions and them answer with that same answer. But then that means you do your homework and you come up with the follow-up questions that only you would ask, so that your episode is the standout episode.
That is a great point, because so you, like with Guy, Erik, is that when somebody comes out with a new book, they have these podcasters they hit, and you're one of them, right? And so they usually have a spiel, like they're trying to push their book sales, which is fine. It's cool. There's a reason they're great authors. But I know what you just said and what Guy says too. His whole goal and what your goal is to have them say, you know what? Nobody's asked me that question before. That's when you're like, ta-da! I got it, And so that, I think it's okay to get those, but make sure that you, like you said, and what Dave Jackson just said, you still need to do your research. Pre-interviews are a good thing. And who is this Dave Jackson? So I didn't do a pre-interview with him. I probably should have done that. But,
Speak of the devil / Hall of Famer.
That's right. Look at him. He's even his icon is like him accepting the award. That is amazing.
I'd do that if I got that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, well deserved. Thank you, Dave, for chiming in. And by the way, his episode was 2 episodes ago. Make sure you go listen to that. I was on his show. I don't think I screwed up too much. So go listen to that episode as well. But as we're going on these strategies, because one of the things is I want to bring up questions from people. Our friend Dustin Stout, who is also a guest, way back. You need to go check it out. We were talking about AI. He's got an amazing tool. By the way, Dustin, read an article yesterday from Insider, mentioned your tool. This guy was building this great, awesome app, and he used your tool to do it with. I hope you saw that, but it was in Insider, so very, very cool. But he goes, tuning in late, has there been any talk about growing a purely entertainment-driven podcast with no side business that's meant to generate leads for? Just doing it for fun, I guess, was he saying. Because he's asking because he has a friend, yeah, I have a lot of friends too, Dustin, who just wants to be a podcaster in the style as, for example, Joe Rogan. He's not sure how to grow a podcast like that when it's not a niche or, kind of topic. It sounds like he wants to be a podcaster to be a podcaster. Does that make sense? I mean, he wants to just be entertainment. So what are your thoughts on that? A lot of us have tried entertainment podcasts in the past. I know Erik has done a YouTube podcast. I think he's frozen right now. But so, Chris, I'll go to you. What are your thoughts about
this? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. The video's just frozen for some reason.
Yeah. You look like you're thinking hard. Chris, I will go for you, and maybe Erik will unfreeze by that time.
I mean, if you're someone that people know, right? I mean, you have some sort of quote unquote celebrity, then yeah. I mean, how many podcasts have you hit play on and you know who the person is and you're like 5 minutes into this, you're like, okay, I learned about you walking out and getting your mail today and talking about just random subjects. I mean, the only reason why a lot of these people are getting, listened to is because of, now if they're, interesting and they have, something that would drive people to listen to them, even though they don't know it, it's a long game. And I really feel like just doing something from an entertainment perspective, if it makes you feel great and it's fun for you, totally fine. I mean, having fun is a great reason to do a podcast. It absolutely is. Some people will do a podcast just because it's self-therapy for themselves. Like, I'm going to try to improve myself, so I'm just going to have a podcast about it, and hopefully it reaches somebody, but it's really completely self-serving. Totally fine. But are you going to expect that to become, top of the charts on iHeartRadio or whatever? No. I mean, It's just, don't expect that. But if you're wanting to drive more business, I mean, you really have to get a little bit more tactical about who the people are that you're serving. Like, who do you want as to be at the top of your funnel or whatever you're trying to do? If you're trying to be a keynote speaker to get more gigs, are you targeting the people that book you for gigs, right? Are you doing that? Are you being a little more tactical about the message that you're delivering and being able to solve those people's problems? And there's nothing wrong with pure entertainment podcasts. It's just, not only is it a long game, it's a longer game, in my opinion, unless you have some level of celebrity. That's just my opinion.
I think that's a great. What are your thoughts, Erik?
I completely agree. I think back in the day, it would have been an easier starting point and easier to do with just a, hey, I'm going to talk about random topics kind of show. But how do you find a show? Like, again, if I, as a person, were looking to go be entertained by a show like that, where do I go to look for that? Like, what do I call it? Like, what do I search for? What's the SEO on that? To go with our friend Lauren Gaggioli's expertise. It's like, oh, guy talking about stuff. Like, how much different things is that going to bring up? So I think, unfortunately, you do need to narrow it. This is one of the reasons why I personally have not come out with an additional podcast in my production that in time, but because you had to narrow down the topic. So, and it takes a while and it takes a thought process, but I think you have to niche at least a little bit.
Yeah. So I want to bring what Dustin goes. My friend just wants to make a living doing a podcast where he just talks about random topics of interest. And he said, Dustin also said, he's not a celebrity, but he has a great personality. I would say go to the podcast School of Podcasting by Dave Jackson, because Dave talks a lot about this, about how important it is to have a niche, because just saying, I mean, a lot of people want to be Joe Rogan. A lot of people want to be on fire, like, John Lee Dumas, like social media on fire, that happened, and have a flaming microphone for their logo. So there's got to be a way to stand out. And once again, go look at, Dave's got a bunch of free stuff. He's got a bunch of episodes about this very subject. So I would tell your friend to go watch Dave Jackson and maybe even enroll in his School of Podcasting, because I think that would help him out. So I want to get back to me and talk about, Eric, how about how we do this mastermind. And because I think it's one of these things that I know it's boosted my business, my podcast, my life, everything, being a part of a mastermind group. So I want you to talk a little bit about joining or starting a podcast mastermind group. What are some key factors that you might think of? Because we've been doing it for a long time. We actually have gone now beyond just, we're talking about podcasts. We talk about our business and our life and, kids moving out of the house. So it is a very integral part of my Monday mornings that I don't miss. So talk about that, and just kind of, if somebody's wanting, like, I want what Jeff and Eric have, how do they do that?
With any good mastermind, it's always about the caliber of the people in the group. You can have considerations about topic and how many people are in the group, but it all comes down to the quality of the people in the group and the openness of the people in the group. And so, and hope that they accept you. There's that, what is it? Groucho Marx quote about any group that'll accept me is not a good group to be in. Anyways, you want to have expectations, and you want to have them met. You want to all agree that there's a certain standard or code, or, like, you don't want people, I mean, masterminds, there's usually this hot seat thing where, okay, this week it's this person and this person, or just one or whatever, and it's their turn to share and all of that. Thing is you don't want to come around to somebody whose turn it is for the hot seat, and they're just like, yeah, I need help with this and this. And it's like, they don't really have, I mean, you're there to help them, and for them to help you when it's your turn. But if they're not really fully present, if they're not really engaged with the group, if they're just showing up, for their hot seat day to get a whole bunch, but then when it's not their hot seat, they're not sharing, they're not giving insight, they're not observing and helping, then, that's just selfish. Again, that kind of goes back to, the whole strip mining thing. It's like, well, I'm in this group for me, not for you. And that's not the purpose of a mastermind.
Yeah. And it's okay to walk away. Like, it's okay to say, like, you don't want to stay and say, oh, it's going to get better, when it's probably not, because it's the same people. But once again, I really want to figure out a way. And, I think this is our friend Lou Mangello saying, the Erik Fisher. He's got a great mastermind and group as well. But so, and we met at a conference. So I want both of you guys to talk about, when we go to these, because we formed it, the mastermind, after we met at a conference, thought, let's continue this conversation weekly is kind of how it developed. So how do you approach networking at, like, large events and conferences, especially when you see people like, it's easy to go hang out with the same people. Eric, you talked about having a strategy. It's funny because we were all planning on going to this really big podcasting conference, and we're all not right now. So you also have to figure out the ROI. What? What'd you say, Chris?
We're talking about it. It's
right.
Like, podcast movement's happening next week, but we're not going to be there.
Yeah.
Hey,
but there's a reason
the name till now.
Yeah, but there's a reason why.
Let's just say this caveat: we all wish we were going, right?
Yeah.
We all wish that we were going, and the reasons
100%.
vary between us, and that's okay. Like my daughter's going to college, as well as there's like some budgety stuff, which again, that's directly related to college. So whatever. but you better believe I'm already planning on going to something else in January and hoping to go to the next podcast movement anyway.
Right.
So there you go. I think what it comes down to is there's been too many events that I've gone to, and that after it's all said and done and I'm on my way home, I realize, oh crap, I never hung out with so-and-so, or we didn't get to spend enough time together with the people that I did hang out with. I go in now trying to have a what I call a hit list, because I'm a networking assassin, and or at least I try to, and often I try to make plans with those specific people ahead of time that I definitely want to spend as much time with as I can, or at least make sure I have a good 20-minute, half-hour coffee with, and I try to plan those out as much as possible before the event happens, so that I know that I've got those in my back pocket that are definitely happening. Obviously, leaving wide open the room to meet people like Chris and Jeff serendipitously through other people, because again, that's how you add people, and you grow your network and find out, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had so much in common with Jeff, or those kinds of things. You just don't know till you actually meet him. But again, you've got to go in with some kind of an expectation of ROI to make it make sense, and it definitely means hanging out with certain people, whether you already know them, or again, you can have a hit list. And I have different tiers of the hit list, I should say. So the one is people I know. Another one is people I want to spend a lot of time with. And then there's ones where it's like, hey, I just want to shake their hand and say thank you. If I only get to do that, great. If we get a couple more sentences, or even 5-10 minutes in the hallway, perfect. But I lower my expectations, and then just try to make sure I know, where they're going to be for speaking, and kind of either go to the session or sit outside the session, or, or be there when they're leaving the session, those kinds of things. And I was able to do that with some people.
Yeah. So Erik and I, we always meet over the buffet line. No, that's no, but eating together, going out to eat with friends and stuff, that is another place to be strategic. Chris Stone, I want to know what you do, because you're a very strategic guy. He barely will even talk to me at a conference, because he's just like, I've got to talk to everybody but Jeff. No, just kidding. But what do you do? How do you handle those things? Do you have a assassination list like Erik, or what are your thoughts because the cool thing when we went to Podcast Movement or Podfest, you took me around and introduced me to people that I didn't know, like Roger Cloud, those people who make microphones and stuff like that. You introduced me to some of your contacts, which I just was very thankful and grateful for. Got me some brand deals and stuff. So what is your strategy when you go to a conference like one of those?
That's exactly what I do. Is I try to be a connector. And that is how I serve when I go to those. I don't look at it as here I want to learn this. Of course I go to learn and sort of, but my rules basically for one of my rules every day. Well, here's my 3 rules: listen to music every day, make my wife laugh every day, and to create more than I consume. So when I go to these events, those rules are still the same. I call my wife and I make her laugh. I listen to music, and I try to create even when I'm at those events. And the way I create is I connect people, and I try to create something there while I'm there. And of course I'm going to consume. I'm going to go see Erik Fisher, talk about something. I'm going to go see, Marcus Sheridan talk or whatever, I'm going to be able to do to try to learn and to sharpen my saw, of course. But I want to sharpen somebody else's saw. And so that's really what I try to do is I try to, Podfest has, I'm on their board of ambassadors or whatever. So that's one of the things that I do for them is like, hey, do you know Jody Krangle? She does voiceovers. You're looking for somebody to do, something here. Hey, you guys need to talk. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I'm trying to connect people and help people, because a lot of people, and we haven't talked about this, Erik, is like a lot of people are introverted, right? And they're going to these things, and they're freaking out inside, and they don't know what to do. And I thought the one of the shows that you did on Beyond the To-Do List, I don't know, it was maybe 2-3 weeks ago with Phil Mershon, and you guys, you were talking about, how to, how he orchestrates that event and how he presents things to different types of people. Some people they just need someone to kind of go, hey, tell me about your show. What can we do? Like, and just point them in the right direction, and then you feel better about it.
Yeah. I think that there's so much good wisdom in there, and that's going to be repurposed, by the way. But one of the things that I like to go to conferences, and I like to see who's on the fringes, like, because I have been that person, like high school, junior high, like we have been there, and I always want to go and talk to them and bring them in to the conversation. There's some, and I think Phil taught us this one time, is like how even when you're standing around in a circle, to be open so people can come in and join that circle and not be a closed off thing. There's all those little techniques, and Phil's going to cover it in his book. Our friend Gary says he's going to business to a B2B forum in October and hoping to make some new connections in addition to learning. Gary, you're not going to have any problem with that because you're very open and very giving, and I'm sure that you're going to make some great connections. The other thing I always like to do, kind of my strategy, is I want to go to a conference and learn something, but the only other sessions I go to is when my friends are speaking. Like, I want to support them. Katie Brinkley was, she was speaking that, I think, podcast movement. I went to her session. The other stuff is, let's talk about the hall stuff, like, because that is where the magic happens. And Erik, I want to know if you've ever had a missed opportunity that taught you something about networking. Like, was there a time where you went, if I would have just had enough courage, or, if I would have, that guy later on I found out was like a big fan of mine and I didn't even go up and talk to him. Have you ever had anything like that where you wish you kind of had a missed opportunity?
I think there's been too many to count. So that's kind of why I came up with the hit list, because, let alone, I mean, there were just, I'm trying to think of a specific one that doesn't feel too shameful. But I think, honestly, I think one of the things that kind of helped me out, and, to tie this back into podcasting, was I just thought, you know what, it would be amazing to get this specific person. I'm doing a productivity podcast. Well, productivity, you think David Allen, getting things done.
Right. And
the story I always share is that, I thought right up front, it was within the first few episodes, I thought, I'm going to need to reach out and ask, because I don't, who knows how long it'll take to get him. And what I did was I emailed through his site, and within 24 hours, his wife replied and said, David would love to do it. How about this day at this time? And I did not expect to get that answer. And I could have gotten a no, and I would have been okay with it. And I would have replied and said, hey, so is there a process, or, all those kinds of follow-up questions. But getting the yes suddenly made me think, wait, so the worst that can happen is I get a no? Well, then, or they shrug me off. Well, okay, fine, whatever. I can deal with that. I can even deal with not getting a response. But getting the yes feels so good. Why not just keep going? So, I think that ultimately that kind of paved the way for being a little bold. I am sure there's been a couple of times where I've gone up to people or tried to, and I think really the real issue, and this is again why I do the hit list and try to do the pre-planning, is if I haven't done that planning, then I'm not going to be in the right place or right enough place or right enough time to be able to make that by chance, handshake and thank you, like I want to. And so I had completely missed out on, and there's a couple where I was like, oh, I missed out on that one. And then later I'm like, I don't care that I missed out on that one, because later I was just like, I don't really like that person anymore, but still.
The truth comes out. So
have either one of you guys tried to record podcasts at conferences?
I've been a part of them before, but I have never tried to do it myself. I've gone into somebody's got a hotel room or something, and we've done an episode that I've done something with. We did do a live podcast from Ecamm's booth. I think I've done that twice. Yeah, that was fun great. Because people would come by. I mean, Pat Flynn jumped in one time. I mean, it's just that kind of stuff was fun. It was a live video. It really wasn't a podcast where I was trying to get deep. But I think you guys came on. Jim did for one of the rotations. Maybe you weren't there at that one, Chris, but Yeah, so
he did the Tim and Jim show at Social Media Week Lima.
Okay.
I want to say, and I've tried to do it at Podfest. It's one of those things where and this was going to be my question for you, Erik, is like, how does multitasking go? And maybe not just for conferences, right? And I'm talking to the productivity expert here, so I'm this is free consulting for me too. But like, when you're running a podcast and you're running everything that you're running, and how do you kind of find the time to network? Is it pre-show before you get on? Is it post-show, and you're juggling all the plates? Like, what about the balance there between producing your podcast and maybe the time and the effort that's required for networking?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So balancing the time between producing a show but also networking really comes down to producing a show the most streamlined and optimized way that you can. And one of the biggest things that took a lot of the time off the plate for me was hiring an editor. And I should have done it way earlier. I think Jeff even told me to hire an editor way earlier, but I don't always listen to him. But anyway, yeah, I think as much as you can streamline your process, your vetting, your in and outtake, as well as just how much time you're taking on editing. And one of the things that I learned when I was still editing was just how to make that go faster each time. Even doing something that I highly recommend to people, even if you're not releasing them all at once, is to definitely batch record. That doesn't always work for live video, obviously, because you can't just go live all day, every day, although some people would do that just to get a bunch in. But I'm saying, if you can batch record a bunch of episodes in a faster click than you usually do, then you've got time off, and then you can spend some time networking. But there's also the idea that, I mean, I book a whole hour. My show usually runs 40, 45, 50 minutes tops. And we book the whole hour. And so, and there's a few reasons for that. One is you want to have a little bit of buffer in case there's issues with connection, tech, et cetera, right up front, but also the ability to chat, on the back end.
Right. Yeah.
I have said this, I think, to you, Jeff, and I don't have it recorded. I wish I did. But when I had Seth Godin on recently, a couple months back in May, when we were done, and I was like, okay, we're all done. Thank you, Seth. He said, Erik, you are really good at what you do. And if I didn't have that extra time built in, like, he wouldn't have said that to me, and it wouldn't have filled my heart with joy and made me feel super inspired to hear that from him specifically. I mean, anybody can say it. Jeff can say it. It won't mean what Seth said. And so anyway, just having that buffer time in your connection time, but then also in your, oh, you know what? I'm going to follow them on all the socials. I'm going to interact. I'm going to like that, not just to share my show and get them to share the show, but for me to see what they're doing and like what they're doing. And I've done that intentionally with guests. I have a guest who was on. She's really good at this. And she used to work at Netflix. She's really good at this. She has emailed me on like July 1st. January 1st, and then like midsummer, and just to check in. And I follow her on Instagram, and she does really cool stuff and funny TikTok, or not TikToks, reels. And I wouldn't have that connection now. I mean, again, at some point I'll have her back on, but it's not just about that. It's about like, we're connecting, and she's thinking of other people that'd be good on my show, and things like that. And again, it's not all just about the content you're creating. It's about the things you don't know, and the connections that you make that you don't know are going to change your life.
Well, that is that's just great to end on.
Tweetable moment.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, Xable moment. What is
because it? I just don't think you can podcast in a vacuum. Even if you're doing a solo show, you've got to have people to help you either push it out or help you with show ideas. But if you're doing an interview show like Erik does, like Chris does, and like what we do, you have to rely and build up that network. And starting from zero can be hard. It can be a little bit intimidating. And I hope this episode helped you with some ideas, got your brain cells firing, because it is all about the network. It's all about the people you meet, the way you treat other people, the way you make them feel like they are super special. And speaking of that, Chris Stone, super special guy, coming on this show. Before we get to Erik, tell us where we can find out more about you and all of your services.
I am Chris Stone. I'm at castahead@castahead.net, or you can go to chrisstone.contact, and that'll give you all the tubes you can connect with me on, and love to be able to talk with you if you're someone that wants a show. You just don't want to figure out how the sausage is made. We do that for you at Cast Ahead.
Awesome. My friend Erik Fisher, where can people find out and listen to your amazing podcast? And maybe even plug some of your shows that you have done or have coming up.
Yeah, so you can find it again at beyondthetodolist.com. Lots of great episodes. I mentioned Seth Godin just a minute ago. Also have Mike Williams, who used to work for David Allen, has a great book out there. And in fact, the brand new episode that's going to be coming out soon is I did just talk with John Acuff again. Had a great conversation. We had a great rapport. I know I asked him stuff nobody else is going to ask him, which is great. And that book and his episode are coming out, I believe, the first week of September. So in 2 weeks. So jump in right now, take a look at the back catalog and follow so that you're ready for that one when it comes out.
Yeah, a couple of great ones that I personally would recommend is go and listen to John Acuff's one, because he is funny, but it's really good stuff. Also, there's some really good ones about sleep. If you're into that, I've gotten some really great help with getting better night's sleep. And then finally, I'm a big fan of Todd Henry. He's been on like 4 or 5 times. Just go and batch listen to those if you're interested in creativity or the creativity process. He was a music guy, Chris, and so he's got some really cool stuff. Talking about that as well, his books. Gosh, I can't remember his books now, blanking on them. But anyway, all his books are great. And with that, all of you guys are great. Thank you so much for being here. Chris, Gary, all the folks, Facebook users, Dustin, Dave Jackson even stopped by. We appreciate all of you guys for checking in today. And I really want to say thank you to my friends over at Ecamm. You can find out more about them at socialnewslive.com/Ecamm. They're the ones that allow us to do this show. We're going live with them. At the end, we'll have a perfect podcast because of the isolated audio tracks and also repurposing with their amazing video tracks. If you have a Mac Silicone machine, it lets you do that, and it is so handy dandy for repurposing all of your content. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you. Bye, everybody.